abin nan. Good. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
We are welcome to this interview, the first interview for the Islamic economist for the year 2026. We'll be very glad if you can please introduce yourself to our viewers. Not many of us here in Ghana have heard about you, but I think it will do our listeners a lot of good if you can please give us a background of yourself, what you've been doing, before we move on to the interview proper.
So, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man walahu wa ba'd. Once again, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. My name is Ahmad Dogarawa. I am currently a professor in the Department of Accounting, Ahmadu Bello University, Zaria, Nigeria. Ahmadu Bello University, Zaria, popularly known as ABU Zaria, is a premier university in northern Nigeria, being the first university established in 1962. And the Department of Accounting is one of the oldest departments in the university. So that is where I teach. My area of interest spans across financial reforms, Islamic finance, and epistemology of accounting and finance. These three are the areas of interest to me. In addition to the work I do in the university, I also participate and contribute modestly to the community where I live. Dogarawa is my village, and it is located in Sabangar local government. So in Dogarawa and in Sabangari, I participate in a number of community-based activities. I am a regular invited guest to many communities, many programs, and a number of community-based organizations, civil society organizations, and especially religious bodies invite me to give sensitization talk and create awareness on a number of issues that bother on the interest of the Ummah in particular, and the development of our dear country, Nigeria, in general. I'm also the chairman ABU Muslim Forum and one of the Jum'ah Imams in the Islamic Trust of Nigeria Central Mosque, that is ITN Zaria. Our Central Mosque in Dogarawa, as well as ABU Central Mosque. I belong to a number of organizations and professional bodies. I am also one of the promoters of Islamic finance in Nigeria. I'm currently serving as a member of the advisory committee of experts for Jaiz Bank PLC, as well as many other Islamic funds in Nigeria. I'm also a member of some professional bodies and one of the promoters of the halal economy ecosystems in Nigeria. I think this is what I have to say for now. Jazakumullah khairan.
Ameen. Thank you very much indeed. And I am Baba Yunus Muhammad. I double as the editor-in-chief of our news website called The Islamic Economist. I also double as the president of Africa Islamic Economic Forum, a think tank based here in Ghana, but work in every country in Africa where our services are required. And of course, you have been a founder of the Africa Islamic Economic Forum. I recall in 2011, when we met in Kano, and part of the recommendations, an organization like ours was recommended to be set up, and we took up the responsibility to do it. So it is unfortunate we have not been seeing much of you, but we hope that this is going to be the beginning. So we are going to be seeing you regularly here on our platforms, sharing your knowledge and wealth of experience with our viewers and readers. So you are welcome once again.
Thank you very much, and it is my pleasure to be on this call.
Thank you very much. We are going to discuss about taxation in Africa, but particularly our focus is going to be on Nigeria because, as we all know, Nigeria is the engine room of Africa. If Nigeria gets it right, Africa gets it right. If it gets it wrong, Africa gets it wrong. So, and we have classified this interview into about 7 sections. And I believe maybe, I know you have a lot of stamina, so you can take us through all of them if possible. So we can start with Nigeria's current tax debate. Recently, some of us are aware that you granted an interview to the BBC Hausa service on this particular issue. And currently, Nigeria is undergoing renewed tax reforms and fiscal stress. It's the core problem Nigeria is trying to solve through taxation. Insufficient revenue, weak compliance, or deeper governance failures.
Well, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulullah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man walahu wa ba'd. The federal government of Nigeria has spelled out the key objectives of the tax reforms. And I think it will be better if I just mention a few that I can easily remember in this interview. As you may be aware, Nigeria has been operating an old tax system, so much so that in some parts of the tax laws, we still see kobos, even when there are no kobos in circulation in Nigeria. Yet there are still kobos and even shillings, which, as we know, is a remnant of the period of colonization. We are also faced with various tax frameworks and taxes that companies in particular are required to pay, several of them. So one of the key objectives of the Nigeria's tax reform is to consolidate various legal frameworks related to taxation. For example, we have TED Fund, which is a government institution or agency that support generally tertiary education in Nigeria. There is a provision within our tax laws that certain companies that fall within the threshold or that are classified as qualified are required to pay a certain levy. Again, we have NASEMI. It is another agency. There is a legal framework requiring certain categories of firms to pay tax based on the legal framework. There is also NIPDA, and there are many other such legal frameworks. So it is now difficult, or it is making companies to face a lot of difficulties when it comes to complying with these various legal frameworks related to taxation. So one of the key objectives of these tax reforms, according to the federal government, is to consolidate various legal frameworks relating to taxation so that there will be harmony. Two, the government also wants to expand the country's tax base, because at the moment, our tax base is very, very low, according to certain statistics revealed or that were released by both the World Bank, IMF, Statista, and many other databases. If you check the country's tax base in relation to other countries that are even smaller, with lower GDP, with less population, with less net worth individuals and companies that operate in the country, our tax base is still very, very small. So the government wants to expand the country's tax base. Another key objective, according to the country, according to the president, or according to the federal government, is the need to enhance tax compliance. Because at the moment, many people are evading, not only avoiding, but evading taxes. People are not paying tax. Companies are also avoiding and in some cases evading taxes. So they want a situation whereby this new tax laws would enhance tax compliance. They also mentioned the issue of addressing complexities of the current tax system, because at the moment, people are not really certain or very clear about which tax to pay and which not to pay, especially for companies. There are a lot of challenges that companies are facing. So with the current or with the new tax law, it is expected that some of these complexities would be addressed. They also talk about the need to generate sustainable revenue streams for national development, because we have a lot of developmental gaps, and it is only through additional revenue streams that these developmental gaps can be closed or bridged. So through these new tax reforms, it is expected, according to the federal government, that these tax reforms will help in the generation of sustainable revenue streams for national development. So this, in summary, are some of the key objectives of the tax reforms as outlined by the federal government. I only mentioned some. There are more to it. There are many others, but I mentioned I am able to remember some of these key objectives.
Yeah, but you are on record to have argued publicly that improving tax collection is important. How should policymakers ensure that tax reforms does not deepen public resentment in the context of widespread poverty and inflation, as we have in Nigeria?
Yes, it is true. I did not argue against the tax reform in totality, because I believe it is a civic responsibility and people should pay tax, because it is important for government to increase or generate additional revenue streams for national development. So in the context of that, I did not personally argue against the tax reform in totality, more especially that I am fully aware that the tax laws we are operating are archaic, they are outdated. So we need to update them, we need to improve on our tax system. So therefore, on the basis of that, I supported the tax reform. However, I did that with a caveat that one would have expected that Nigerian government would give Nigerians some respite and breathing space in view of the withdrawal of fuel subsidy and allowing the dollar to float in the market, thereby making the prices of essential commodities to skyrocket. The prices of essential commodities have skyrocketed, and the inflation is biting hard on Nigerians. So I would have expected that the government would allow some breathing time for Nigerians to recover fully and also to absorb the shocks arising from the withdrawal of fuel subsidy and other subsidies that have been there and the common man was enjoying. With the removal of all of this, the prices of essential commodities have skyrocketed, as I have said. So inflation is biting very hard on the people. So one would have expected that the government will consider any tax reform as untimely, meaning there is wrong timing for this tax reform. And that was one of the things I mentioned, but I did not argue against the tax reform itself. However, I argued against the timing because I consider it as a wrong time. But be that as it may, it has already been done because the bills have been transmitted. We only got to know about it after it was transmitted or after the bills were transmitted to the National Assembly for debate and for consideration and eventual passage. And that was when we came into the whole thing, or rather, that was when the picture became clear to us. And we contributed our quota towards the debates and also looking at what it has or what the bills contain, their advantages and disadvantages, and what we think the government should do in order to lessen the burden and maybe the hardship that Nigerians will be exposed to if the bills were to be passed the way they were originally drafted. Thank God, Alhamdulillah, the National Assembly listened to some of our arguments on the basis of which they actually amended, adjusted, modified the bills and eventually passed them for the presidential assent. So by and large, one would say that in Nigeria, yes, the bills, the reforms are actually timely. However, the reforms are important, but maybe the timing is wrong in view of the kind of poverty that people are exposed to. But then there has to be a time to start something, no matter what. So therefore, in my opinion, yes, we have advocated that the bills are okay, or rather the bills or the reforms are actually okay and are timely. We need them. However, looking at the condition of our people, it is truly not timely, or rather there is a wrong timing in terms of when should have this tax laws be implemented. And that's why one of our key inputs to the debate, even though it was actually not taken or carried, is the fact that there should be a moratorium. It's not just about 1st January 2026, but more time should have been granted, at least to create awareness, make people be aware and understand what it is and what is there for them, what is at stake, what are the benefits, and what are the things they should be concerned with in case this, whenever this thing is implemented. But there was no such advocacy, there was no such sensitization, enough sensitization, and the bills have been passed, and now we have the laws in place. They have already been, the government has already, has started implementing them. And that would also, have a lot of implications on the poverty rate of our people, especially because people are not well informed for them to be able to know what to adjust, what to do and what not to do, what to record and what not to record, what to report and what not to report, and so on. Because there is this lack of sensitization, some of these things, no matter how beneficial the new tax laws appear to be, there might be certain implications which many of our people may not be aware of.
So do you believe that Nigeria's tax discourse places enough emphasis on how tax revenues are spent, or is the debate too narrowly focused on collection and enforcement?
Actually, in my own opinion, the government seems to focus more on how to generate the revenue. and not even on how to spend the revenues judiciously or how to make the benefits or the supposed benefits of the new reforms to accrue to the common man. So it is like governments, spend more time, focus more attention on how to generate the revenues. In other words, the additional streams that will bring more money to the government rather than administration or creating awareness on for people to know what is at stake.
So now, I think this now brings us to this issue of taxation and social contract. Because I think in Africa, the concept of taxpayers' money, I don't think it is something we can even see in our daily lives. We always read about the taxpayers' money, hard-earned taxpayers' money. But whereas maybe, for example, in the developed countries, if, for example, a politician lives near me and I see him putting skyscrapers or building or buying expensive cars, I would just say that maybe he's using my taxes to do all these things. And also, you expect that if government is even putting more taxes on people, sorry, we lost you.
Yes,
So
exactly.
can you discuss, in context, can you please tell us more about this taxation and social contract as we have in Nigeria or in Africa generally? At what point does
Well,
taxation in a fragile economy become economically counterproductive or ethically problematic?
well, part of the problem with taxation in Africa generally is the fact that there is what we call a trust deficit. By trust deficit, I mean you have a situation whereby people do not believe in what government do with the tax it collects from the citizens. So taxation can be counterproductive, no doubt, when the rates discourage people from work. So if, for example, you have high rates that will discourage people from work, that, okay, I rather not work. It's better I do not work in order not to be taxed heavily than to work, and then maybe more than half of whatever I get as income will go to the government. So when you have a very high rate, definitely that taxation will be counterproductive. Again, if tax rate is also high to the extent that it will discourage investment or compliance, that will be counterproductive. But that is not to say that what we have now in Nigeria is counterproductive or will be counterproductive, because I think the rate is not that heavy, it's not that very high, and people can afford it. In fact, in most cases, especially for individual, personal income tax, the rate has even come down. It has come down actually. The only people that will be most affected by the new tax law are people who belong to the small niche of high, income earners. These are the ones that will be, affected by the new tax law. Otherwise, for the middle class as well as the lower income earners, honestly, the tax rate has been reduced, and the amount they are going to pay as tax will now come down as against what it used to be in the old law. So for us in Nigeria, the rates are okay, but generally, taxation will be counterproductive if the rates are actually capable of discouraging people from working or investing or compliance. Again, tax would be counterproductive, or taxation will be counterproductive if taxes worsen poverty or economic instability. For example, if a tax increases poverty, rate or incidence of poverty, or the number of people that will be classified as poor, active poor, then definitely that tax or taxation system is truly counterproductive. Again, if taxation is or is capable of worsening the economic instability of a country, maybe through inflation or other means, then that taxation or tax system will be counterproductive. Also, where maybe the collection of taxes lacks fairness, if the system of collection and distribution lacks fairness, then that taxation is counterproductive. Also, where there is no transparency or there is lack of capacity for the officials of tax authorities to be able to collect tax, to remit them as at when due, then that tax system will be considered counterproductive. Otherwise, I think tax generally, if it does not discourage work, if it does not discourage investment or compliance, if it does not worsen poverty or economic instability, if it does not lack fairness, transparency, or capacity, that tax system will be considered generally as satisfactory and acceptable. However, going back to the issue of social contract, people would always have this minimal trust or trust deficit in government, where government is seen to be unserious or where government is seen to be breathed with corruption and manipulation, unjust distribution of the tax revenue. That would make people to begin to ask regarding social contract. Is government living up to expectation as far as the taxes it is collecting from the citizens, or government is not living up to expectation, that people are being taxed and the taxes are collected and harnessed and government is spending the monies recklessly or even enriching individuals and cronies. So once you have this, then the issue of social contract regarding taxation will be seriously affected. And that is why, for example, in Nigeria, we have this trust deficit, because people see government spending these revenues unjustifiably, and that only few individuals are benefiting from all the revenues that government is generating.
Now, being an expert in Islamic economics, we can't, go far in this interview without talking about Islamic perspectives on taxation. From the standpoint of Islamic economics, what distinguishes a legitimate taxation and illegitimate extraction, taxation, or unjust taxation?
Okay, let me start by mentioning to us that modern taxes that we know today, which are usually paid without a direct benefit, because when you pay tax, you don't ask government, what are you going to do with the tax? It is a civic responsibility according to the theory of taxation as it is known today in the modern economy. So there are taxes paid without a direct benefit. However, benefits go to the collective, meaning the society as a whole. So this kind of taxes that involve paying something without a direct benefit did not exist in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam or the time of the rightly guided caliphs. And that is why leading Muslim jurists have different opinion regarding the ruling on these modern taxes. There are about 3 different opinions. One, a group of scholars prohibits taxes beyond zakah. They consider any tax beyond zakah as an unlawful levy, and that it is haram, it is not permissible for government or for individuals or leaders to impose any form of levy on individuals other than zakah, because according to them, it is only zakah that is compulsory. The second view permits temporary taxes on the wealthy and not on every individual, only the wealthy, so that if there is gap between government budget and revenue, then wealthy individuals should be asked to bring money, to contribute money to bridge that gap, to cover that gap, so that government will be able to pursue those infrastructural and developmental projects which the public funds would not be able to cater for. So according to this view, temporary taxes are permissible, but on the wealthy individuals, whenever public funds are insufficient to cover the needs of government regarding public welfare. The third opinion allows taxes in return for public services, whether as an individual you directly benefit from those services or not, provided the services are meant to benefit the public generally, meaning they are part of public services, then it is permissible to tax individuals, to tax companies, to tax groups on top of zakah, even where zakah is collected by government. They can still impose taxes on individuals and on companies. And this third opinion is the scholarly most preferred opinion according to many jurists, especially contemporary jurists. This is because this particular opinion that permits imposition of taxes for the purpose of public service is at-tadamun al-ijtima'i, that is social solidarity, whereby everyone is expected to contribute based on his financial capacity. So if you have much, you have more, then you contribute more. If you have less, you contribute less. And that is why this kind of taxation is permitted. And there is a report that Ibn Abi Shayba mentioned in his Musannaf, a report from Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, that a man came to him and said, I have wealth. Whom do you command me to give my zakat to? And Abdullah ibn Umar said, give it to the leader of the people. Meaning, give it to the ruler. Or in the context of today, we say give it to government or its agency, Zakat and Wakaf agency or commission. Then he said to him, but you should also know that in your wealth, there is a right beyond Zakah. So that right beyond Zakah could be anything. Because if it is a right and it is beyond Zakah, meaning Zakah is different from this right. So after paying that right, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded you who has the means to pay, then there is also another right belonging to the government. The right of the individuals, the right of citizens, the right of Nigerians, the right of Ghanaians, so that when taxes are imposed on you, provided these taxes comply with or are in line with the principle of justice and ability, then so be it. You are also required to pay as a Muslim. This information is very important because we have a group of people, a group of Muslims that think that it is not permissible to even tax people or to collect tax, and that some even consider it haram for individual Muslims to pay zakah, to pay tax, as long as they can avoid or evade that they should not pay. In reality, in truth, and according to the preferred scholarly opinion, it is obligatory on every individual to pay tax, provided there is overall maslaha in the payment of tax, and that the principle of justice, adala, and trust, amana, are actually observed. Now, the fuqaha, the jurists, Muslim jurists, identified certain principles of taxation, which if they are missing, then that tax system is considered unjust and is not in line with the overall principle of adalu and amana. The first one is financial capacity. People should not be asked to pay what is beyond their capacity. Any tax system that is bereft of consideration for financial capacity is really unjust. It's an unjust system. It's unethical, and it is draconian. That's one. Number two, the assessment of all taxes should be just and easy. There shouldn't be complexity. When you come to assess my tax, or if you want me to assess my tax myself, personal assessment, it should be you should make the system or the procedure very transparent, just and easy, so that I will have no reason to evade taxation or to avoid tax, not to even talk of evading tax. So the assessment should be just and should be easy. The third principle normally mentioned by scholars is that the burden of the tax or the burden of the duty to pay tax must be distributed evenly, meaning those who have more should be asked to pay more. Those who have less should be asked to pay less. Those who do not even have what will necessitate them to pay tax should be exempted from paying zakah. This is also an important principle as far as taxation is concerned from an Islamic perspective. Then justice and fairness in the distribution of the revenues is equally important, because if there is no justice, if there is no fairness in the distribution of the tax revenues, then there is a problem, because people will not be motivated to pay and people will not be happy paying tax when actually the revenues are not justly and fairly distributed. And that is why the Muslim jurists now consider this as a principle: justice and fairness in the distribution of the tax revenue. The last point they mention generally, many scholars, many contemporary scholars who have written in the area of taxation have mentioned it, is that if the tax levy or the tax rate is just and fair, then no Muslim should evade. However, if the tax levy or the rate is unjust, then it is permissible for a Muslim, if it is possible for him, to evade that tax, because it amounts to injustice to pay that tax. So therefore, since it is injustice and on the basis of wala ta'awanu alal ithmi wal udwan, then if you can avoid or evade, you can evade as much as you can, provided that will not bring greater harm to you, the evader. Because if it will bring greater harm as a result of maybe being arraigned before a court and being punished or being sanctioned, then it is better not to evade. But all unjust tax levy, if one can evade it, many scholars are of the view that one can go ahead and evade it, because it is in line with wala ta'awanu alal ithmi wal udwan. But if the levy is just and it is equitable and that people can afford it, then people are not allowed to evade tax or even avoid it, not to talk of evading it. So these are some of the issues that are important as far as the Islamic perspectives on taxation is concerned.
But in this case, do you think institutions like Zakat, Wakaf, and other Islamic social finance, mechanisms have any role to play in complementing Nigeria's, taxation system?
Certainly.
I'm not talking of replacing them.
Of course, yes, I know. Because as we know, if we look at what the contemporary Muslim scholars say, or jurists say, regarding the permissibility of charging tax, they are aware that Muslims are required to pay zakah, and Muslims are encouraged to also make wakaf. So they look at these two instruments as complementary instruments to the modern taxation. They are not to replace any modern tax system, but to complement them. So zakah and wakaf, as well as other Islamic social finance instruments or mechanisms, are there to complement modern taxation. If only our modern governments will understand the role of zakah and wakaf and the contribution they stand to make to the overall effort of government to generate more revenues for social welfare, they will definitely key into the issues of zakah and wakaf, and they would also come up with legal frameworks that would justify or that would support the zakah and wakaf operators in collecting and distributing. That is, even if government will not create or establish its own agency or departments or commission, at least it will support NGOs who are into, zakah and wakaf operation to have, a smoother way of doing it based on legal and regulatory frameworks that the government will put in place. Zakah, for example, can support poverty alleviation and social welfare because we know, according to the Quran, the categories of people that are entitled to zakah, إنما الصدقات للفقراء والمساكين والعاملين عليها, up to the end of that verse, I think chapter 9, that's Surah Al-Tawbah, verse 60. Now, if you look at the categories of people who are entitled to a share in the zakah funds, you would see that the overall objective is to alleviate poverty or even, combat it completely, to eradicate it. However, there will be no time when poverty will be eradicated, that you will not have a poor person. No, because that is even why the Quran mentioned poor and needy, al-fuqara and al-masakin, because for any time, at all time, there will be people who are poor and there will be needy people. However, it will alleviate to a great extent the rate of poverty in any community or any country if it is institutionalized and it is efficiently collected and distributed. It will also contribute or support social welfare because the funds of zakah could be used for social welfare. For example, where you talk about al-mu'allafat qulubuhum, these are people who are not Muslims, yet giving them a portion or a share from the zakah would help in bringing social cohesion. At least Muslims will be free from their evil doings, or that would maybe encourage them or bring them closer to the doors of Muslims and Islam, and perhaps they may even embrace Islam. So there is social welfare. Again, because part of the proceeds of zakah can be used for da'wah purposes, for other, important activities, Sharia-based activities. So it will contribute to social welfare. When you look at Wakaf funds, Wakaf can fund education, it can fund healthcare, it can fund also community services. It can provide or it can be used for the provision of community services. So the two, zakah and wakaf, can help in reducing pressure on public spending and taxes. The taxes we are collecting, the revenues from taxes Nigerian government is collecting, is still insufficient. Even with these new laws, with all the efforts to generate or to have additional streams of revenue through these tax reforms, whatever will be collected, it will not be sufficient. It will not be sufficient. So with zakah and wakaf, if put in place, and if the appropriate legal frameworks and the legislative guidance are there, and people are made to understand the importance of paying zakah through a system like government system or organized non-governmental systems, in order to have more impact, or rather for people or beneficiaries to have to feel more impact of the proceeds, that would go a long way in reducing pressure on public spending. Come to think of it, Alhaji Baba Yunus, what happens if you have well-established wakaf that generates streams of income that could be used to fund healthcare? Will people now insist that government should build hospitals or spend money in bringing equipment, doctors, and the rest of it? They will not. Also, what happens if you have an efficient wakaf system whereby the funds are sufficient enough to sponsor the children of the have-nots, the children of the less privileged members of society, orphans, widows, and the rest of them, to pursue their education or acquire basic skills, relevant skills that will enable them to become, self-sufficient, or to have some means of livelihood. There will be not too much pressure on public spending and on taxes. So therefore, zakah and wakaf are important tools. They have always been, and they will continue to serve as important tools that would help in complementing modern taxes. In fact, what zakah and wakaf will generate is far more than what taxes will generate. So if, for example, tax will generate 1 billion naira for Nigerian government, for example, I can assure you with a very good system of Zakat and Wakaf in place, these two have the capacity or the potential to generate 1.5 billion, if not 2 billion naira. So it means if you have these two systems in place, then you are good to go, because you will be able to reduce pressure on public spending and taxes. So the short and long of it is that Zakat and Wakaf have the potential to tremendously complement modern taxes.
Well, now this brings me to this important issue. Tax, as it is, seems to be a local affair, where individuals who reside within a specific geographical area, pay tax to government, or companies operating within the geographical area pay taxes to the government. Now, but there is an issue that has been gaining global currency in this, especially the last few months. I'm talking about external influence and policy ownership. So now, even this Nigerian tax debate, if you go through the various commentaries by experts like you always feel the undertones of external influence. For example, like the whole thing is being spearheaded or being influenced by institutions like IMF or United Nations and so forth. So what can you tell us about external influence and policy ownership when it comes to issue of taxation? Do you think countries like Nigeria or African countries generally can, come out with a sort of independent policy as regard taxation, so that citizens can look at it as, yes, this is our sovereign policy. This policy is being designed for our own interests, not to please some foreign interests?
Honestly, in my own opinion, it will be difficult for countries like Nigeria to do that. Even though government would always come out and claim that it is not been influenced by any foreign power. But we Nigerians, or we the citizens, know that that is not true. Because how can you be independent when it comes to issues like taxation or tax system, when you heavily depend on borrowing? If you borrow, the lender will have his own conditions and terms that must be met. We know the implication of liberalization. One of the consequences of liberalization is that governments, especially in the developing nations, are asked to pursue certain reforms, whether they like it or not. They are asked to pursue certain reforms. We are aware, for example, during the structural adjustments program of the then military administration of General Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida, it was actually tailored towards certain conditionalities. Even though Nigerians were not happy, but because government was in need of those reforms, it had to actually dance to the tune of the foreign powers like IMF and World Bank, because you want to borrow money. So they tell you, okay, if you want to borrow, we'll give you. However, for you to be able to pay, or for you to be able to enjoy this borrowing or loan, you have to do X, Y, Z. And that would involve certain reforms. So generally, tax reforms, foreign exchange reforms, generally are passioned along certain interest by the foreign powers, especially if a country is either import dependent or is borrowing or loan dependent. If you borrow a lot, you import a lot, then you definitely have to dance to the tune of the country that is giving you money or giving you, goods that you are importing goods from. So that is what is happening. The same thing with other, other reforms or other programs that subsequent governments, pursued, including the time of late General Abacha, even during the time of Obasanjo, that's after returning to democratic rule during the time of Umar Musa Yar'Adua. Even though you find that in terms of the extent to which we depend on foreign powers with vis-a-vis our policies differ, because for some they like almost surrender, while for some they did not wholly surrender, but they had to also comply with certain conditionalities by those foreign powers. So it is the same thing with our new tax system. There is this hearsay, because we are not able to confirm with facts and figures that this tax reforms is actually or has been, tailored or has been, spearheaded or has been introduced with a view to satisfying certain conditions by IMF and other, international institutions. We are not sure because I've not seen any fact. I don't have facts or figures to back up this claim. But I am saying it has gained a lot of popularity and that it is a popular narrative in the public space in Nigeria. But whether it is true or not, we all know that Nigeria is an import-dependent country. We also know that Nigeria is a borrowing country. Even with the withdrawal of fuel subsidy, with the allowing, the dollar or naira to float, in the market and struggle against the dollar, which led to a lot of, economic downturns for Nigerians. Yet, all the monies that have been saved from this fuel subsidy removal, we've not seen the impact because Nigeria is still borrowing. I think even a few months ago, Nigeria also borrowed money. So if we continue to borrow, those that are giving us money, the lenders will always have their own conditions, and there is nothing you can do about it. So therefore, this tax reform, as well as other similar reforms, are influenced to a great extent by foreign powers, especially those international organizations and those countries that have what we need and that we rely on for our own survival.
Now, let us look at the issue of corporatization and global inequality. As I do know, in Nigeria, you see that whenever there is tax reform or even tax enforcement, you see that the hammer always falls on the heads of the masses. So how can we address this issue of inequality where you have corporate organizations or companies operating in Nigeria who shift their profits abroad without taxation, or certain high net individuals, as in so, but they are not taxed, but the common man who receives, say, maybe 100,000 naira per month from his salary, taxes will be deducted from, though insignificant. How can we address this inequality and imbalances so that at least everybody will be able to be paying his taxes as at when due, without me feeling that, well, I'm being cheated, somebody's not being paid tax? And also, when we are talking of this issue of external influences and others, how can organizations like ECOWAS, it's an economic organization, how can institutions organized like the African Union play, how role can they play in strengthening Africa's position so that it can maintain its political independence when it comes to issue of economic policy making and taxation?
Well, I think one of the things, one of the objectives of the current tax reform is to address the issue of imbalances in the tax system. There's what they call effective tax rate now for especially multinational corporations. There's no hiding place for them based on the new tax law, except, of course, if in the point of compliance, they will not do the needful. Otherwise, if they would actually implement the laws to the latter, I can tell you that multinational corporations will be made to pay higher tax now because in the past they hide under a number of cover and they don't pay tax as should be, as they should. So, but this time around, there's what they call effective tax rate for corporate organizations. What this means is that no matter what, no matter the waivers, no matter the exemptions, a company is required to pay a certain percentage of its profit. Come, I mean, come what may, it must pay that, and that's what we mean by what they mean by effective tax rate. So they must pay that amount no matter what, which would certainly increase the revenue stream of government through that. So I think the imbalances is being, addressed gradually. Again, if you look at the new tax law, especially as it relates to personal income tax, I mentioned earlier that the burden is less. It has reduced, or it will reduce when they use the new tax rate because of the 800,000 naira exemption, that whoever earns less than 800,000 naira in a year as his gross income is automatically exempted from tax. Again, whoever earns more than 800,000 naira, the first 800,000 naira will be exempted from tax. Then whatever is the balance or whatever is the surplus is what will be taxed. So you can see this 800,000 naira tax waiver or tax exemption is really important, and it will bring a lot of succor to the taxpayer, especially the low income earner as well as the middle income earner. However, for the high income earner, the new tax is not advantageous, it's not favorable. This is because, according to the old law, if you one's gross income, say, is like 15 million naira, annual gross income, then before tax is charged, there's what they call consolidated relief allowance, which is either 200,000 naira or 1% of the gross annual gross income. So whichever is higher is what will be used. So either 200,000 naira or 1% of the annual gross income, plus 20% of the annual gross income. Now, when you put this together, say the annual gross income is 15 million naira. Three Subhanallah, I'm still having network challenge.
No problem. It's okay. You're welcome. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, as I was explaining, now I mentioned the issue of 15 million naira being the annual gross income. Did you hear that?
Yes, we heard that. Yeah.
Good. Okay. Okay. And then I also mentioned that there is what is called CRA, that is Consolidated Relief Allowance, which is usually 200,000 naira or 1%, either 200,000 naira or 1% of the annual gross income, whichever one is higher. That's what will be used. Now, for low income as well as middle income earners, usually 1% of their gross annual gross income is less than 200,000 naira. And that is why 200,000 naira is used as default. But for high income earning individuals, that 1% may be the one to be used. Now, using the 15 million naira annual gross income example, so you remove 20% of the annual gross income plus the 200,000 naira CRA. You add together, that's what you are when you have the total CRA. And as I said, 20% of 1.150 million naira is 3 million naira. So 3 million plus 200,000, 3.2 million. Now you deduct it, you subtract it from 15 million naira. That will give you 12.8 million naira, 12,800,000 naira. This is the taxable income. However, even this, you will not start taxing until you remove all deductibles. For example, NHIS. You remove NHIS from the tax. So if the NHIS per annum is like 1 million naira, then you remove 1 million naira from 12.8 million. You will be left with only 11.8 million naira. Then maybe you have other like housing, scheme, which is also compulsory for workers, especially federal workers, so federal government workers. So assuming it is 800,000 naira per annum, you remove it also, and you will be left with only 11 million naira. So this 11 million naira is what will be taxed. That is what will be taxed. So if you look at it, if you are taxed, and this tax, you are taxed based on the bands. There is a band, so you are taxed if you have this is the rate. When it reaches this is the rate. Like that, they will do the progressive tax calculation and then come up with the amount you will pay as tax. However, with the new tax now, the whole thing has changed. But even that one, now assuming one is a high, income earner or salary earner, assuming one earns up to 30 million naira in a year as gross salary or gross income. Now, 1%, since CRA, that is 200,000 naira, will be lower than 1%, and he can use 1% of the gross. And so 1% of 30 million naira is 3 million naira. So 3 million naira automatically will be used plus 20% of the 30 million naira. And that will give you around, is it 5 or 6 million naira? It will give you around that amount, 6 million naira, I think. So, sorry, that the other one I mentioned, 1% is 300,000 and not, it's not 3 million, 300,000 naira. That is 1% gross of the gross. Then you have 20% of 30 million naira. 20% of 30 million naira will amount to, 6 million. So you now have 6.3 million as the consolidated relief allowance, which will be deducted from 30 million naira before you even talk about tax. After deducting it, then you deduct NHIS, you deduct maybe housing allowance, you deduct you deduct housing scheme, the government housing scheme, and all other ones. After deduction, they are all tax exempt. They are not part of what will be taxed. Then the balance is what will be subject to taxation. So you can see if someone is a high salary earner, the old system is good for him because he will pay an amount after deducting 1% of the gross plus 20% of the gross. However, in the new system now, which will favor the low and middle income earner. The way they want to do it is, okay, that person who earns 15 million naira per annum as his gross income. This time around, there is no consolidated relief allowance. It's no more. It is gone. However, they replace it with rent allowance. In the past, rent allowance is not actually tax, exempt. It is tax deductible. But this time around, they exempt it from tax. But the problem here is what they say is you will be exempted from tax on your rent if and only if you are not living in your own personal house. That is one. Two, if you can provide evidence that yes, you pay X amount of rent, X amount as rent. Three, it is 20% of the rent, not the entire rent. So if you pay, for example, 2 million naira in Abuja to rent a 1-bedroom apartment, you are only entitled to 20% of 2 million naira. 20% of 2 million naira is 400,000, but your own rent is 2 million naira. So you will only be exempted from taxation to the tune of 400,000 naira and not 2 million naira. Again, if you pay like 5 million naira, 20% of 5 million naira is maybe is 1 million naira. But you won't be exempted up to 1 million naira because they have capped it. The maximum you can be exempted from is 500,000 naira. So it is 20% or 500,000 naira, whichever one is less. Whichever one is less, not whichever one is more or is maximum, whichever is the maximum. Well, to the maximum of 500,000 naira, and whichever one is higher. So if, whichever one is lower. So if 20% is lower than 500,000 naira, then you would only be exempted from taxation to the tune of that amount, which is lower than 500,000 naira. If 20% of your tax is above 500,000 naira, you will only be exempted to the tune of 500,000 naira. So it means if someone is paying, say, if one is staying in his own house, there is no, tax relief on rent. If one is paying tax, for example, if one is occupying government quarters, government quarters, usually the amount is very small. So the amount that is being paid may not be up to 100,000 naira, or maybe may not be up to 150,000 naira per annum. You are only entitled 20% of that amount as tax relief. And if you are occupying a big house that you pay, a lot of money, you are still going to be exempted or enjoy tax relief on rent to the tune of 500,000 naira as maximum, or 20% if it is less than 500,000 naira. So if you do the computation, you realize, and that's the only one. Then the other taxables, the other deductibles, like NHIS, housing scheme, and the rest of it. The ruling now is, yes, it is still there, it applies, but subject to the submission of authenticated documents. In the past, you can make claim and it will be allowed. But this time around, you must process the document and submit to the tax authority. Until the tax authority is satisfied, you are not going to be exempted, or you will not enjoy that relief from tax. Now, when you do the calculations, for people now who are high salary earners, we mentioned that 20% of their gross income they will enjoy relief on it. Now, there is no such. It is only their rent. Assuming an individual is collecting 30 million naira as his annual gross income per annum, and he is living in his own personal house, he is not going to enjoy any relief. No consolidated relief allowance, no rent allowance, no relief on rent because he's not paying rent. The only areas or the only amounts that you would enjoy relief is maybe NHIS, subject to submission of verifiable documents. So if you look at it and you do the calculation, although the person will be exempted from tax on the first 800,000 naira, what he is losing, because he's no longer going to enjoy 20% of his annual income as relief, what he's going to pay will be at least maybe 1/3, 1/3, or 1/4 on top of what he used to pay. So, which means if he is paying tax to the tune of like 200,000 naira, this time around he's going to pay about 300,000 naira monthly, because he is not going to enjoy any relief on rent. But in my own case, for example, since I belong to the middle salary earners or middle income earners as a university professor, we all belong to that based on the classification. So this new tax regime is more favorable for us because of that 800,000 naira that we would be exempted from. So if you do the computation, even though there is no consolidated relief allowance for us, except rent allowance, and some of us are occupying government quotas, which means the rent we are paying is small, so the relief is also small. Yet, because of that 800,000 naira, we are going to pay less, because as a university professor, your income bracket is not really up to, for example, I am not aware of any university professor that is collecting more than 600,000 naira per month. So it means that's after all deductions. Now, the gross may be up to 750 or 800,000 naira. So if you take 800,000 naira times 12, you would see that it's not up to 20 million naira. So if you are collecting anything less than 20 million naira, or if you earn less than 20 million naira as gross, then this new regime, this new tax regime will favor you. But if you earn anything up to like 25 million naira and above, then the tax regime will not favor you. Currently, I pay up to 104, or even more, I think more than 100,000 naira as tax. Now, with the new regime, I may pay less than 100, little, less than 100,000 naira, up to about 100,000, but not up to with the new tax. So you can see that the imbalances are being, are being phased out gradually, but still some will not be favored while some will enjoy. So that is the system as it is now.
Professor Dogarawa, but then it appears that this new tax regime in Nigeria is even favorable, it's more progressive, and it's favorable towards the poor. But why is there criticism? Because I've never seen an opposition to a tax policy like this one. Why is it so?
Yes, there are reasons for that, okay. One of them is the fact that it's like they are being given, the poor is being given with the right hand and collected, with the left hand. That is exactly what is happening. For example, yes, I mean for the salary earners, in Nigeria, the workforce, and I think it's general across Africa, the workforce is not up to 20% of the entire population. So it means 80% are really not in the payroll of government at whatever level, across the three levels of government, federal, state, and local government. They are on their own. They operate in the informal sector, or they are like self-employed. Now, these people will not benefit from all these issues that I mentioned. All the advantages I mentioned in terms of reduction in tax will not apply to them. In fact, in the informal sector, people are not used to paying tax in Nigeria. How do you see anybody with kiosks or with a supermarket, except if it is registered? Otherwise, they don't pay. So people in the kiosks, in the localities or in the communities, they don't pay tax at all. They only pay small amount as revenue to local government, maybe 200 naira daily or weekly, 500 naira. Well, you go to the market, you see people arguing, debating over 100 naira that they're supposed to pay daily to government. You understand? So because of that, people are not used to paying tax in Nigeria. I mean, those operating in the informal sector, and they constitute more than 70% of the entire population of Nigeria. So it means, the active population in Nigeria. So it means about 70% who are hitherto not paying tax will now come to pay tax, because the tax bracket has been expanded to cover them. This is one reason why people are actually, not happy with the tax system. But that is not enough reason, because as responsible citizens who are supposed to pay tax. That is one. Two, there is also the issue of fossil tax, which the government said it will start implementing it at the instance of the Minister of Finance. It is the Minister of Finance that will announce the date for the commencement of that tax. So if you pay, if you buy fuel in any filling station, you will be taxed 5% of the amount you pay for the fuel, or the amount of fuel you buy. So you will be taxed 5%. That 5% will naturally increase either the price of fuel, or will increase or will decrease the quantity of fuel you will buy. So if you buy 10,000 naira fuel, you will be charged 5%, which is 50 naira. Which is 500 naira. So if you buy 10,000 worth of fuel, you will either get fuel worth 9,500 naira, or you will pay 10,500 naira for 10,000 naira fuel. That 500 naira that will be added, you know what that means in Africa, especially in Nigeria, because transportation, the cost of transportation will increase, and not commensurate to this increase or this tax of 5% on fossil. Because in Nigeria, when you see anybody like transporters, someone that uses keke napep, for example, and maybe charges like for a distance of say 1 kilometer, if he charges 100 naira for a distance of 1 kilometer or 1 kilometer per passenger, and he's carrying like 4 passengers, it means per kilometer he will charge, all things being equal, if all the passengers would join him at one point, at the same point, and disembark at the same point, it means he would get 400 naira per trip or per drop. But if fuel increases as a result of the introduction of 5% tax, this same transporter, who only, if he buys like 1,000 naira worth of fuel, he's going to be charged only 50 naira. That's the tax. Which means if he buy 1,000 naira fuel, he's paying 1,050 naira. But in return, he is going to increase his fare by like 50 naira or 30 naira. In fact, most cases, he will increase it by 50 naira. And by increasing it by 50 naira, it means 4 people will pay 600 naira as against 400 naira. But for him, he only increased 50 naira. He is only charged 50 naira, but he will increase for every individual 50 naira. And that will give him 150 naira difference from the 50 naira he has paid as tax. That will automatically translate into an increase in the cost of transportation. And that would also mean the cost of essential commodities, including food items, would increase. So now you have relief there. You enjoy some advantages here, but there, due to this increase or due to the introduction of tax on fossil, you are made to pay, through either transportation cost or any other cost, including cost of food items and the rest of them. That is 2. 3, there is very, very low taxpayer education. People don't know what it is at stake, what is good and what is not good, what are the advantages and the disadvantages. They don't know. So because they don't know, generally, as it's been said, Al-maru adu ma jahila. If you don't know something, you tend to be to hate it. So therefore, people don't know and they hate what they don't know. So because of low, taxpayer education, people are not aware of what is at stake. Again, people are not happy because there is no transparent use of tax revenue with public reporting. We all know in Nigeria, the rich continue, those in the helm of affairs continue to enrich themselves. Every now and then people are arraigned before, the court of law, and you see them being sentenced or being, remanded in prisons because they consume or they were, because of accusation of corruption, because of corruption charges. As a result of corruption charges, they are actually being remanded in, correctional services. People that who served in very important positions or key strategic positions in government, after they've left office, the next thing is they are brought to EFCC, they are taken to court, they are blah, blah, all of this, and before you know, they are locked up in prisons. Why? Because of corruption. So it means there are a lot of leakages. The small revenue that government is even claiming or is even complaining that is not enough is not being judiciously utilized, and that's why people are actually not happy and they are agitating against it.
Well, my colleagues are signaling that you need to adjust your camera so that our viewers can see you well. It's like
okay.
Very good. I myself,
How about now?
I think it's yeah, go up a bit.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we are getting to the last stages of the interview. Then
now,
you have of reforms in governance and transparency. What risk do you foresee if Nigeria prioritizes aggressive tax expansion without parallel reforms in governance and transparency? And also, how should Nigeria design a tax enforcement regime which will avoid poverty? While still discouraging invasion, tax evasion. People. People don't like paying tax. They have to be compelled. So how can Nigeria design a tax policy which encourages, encourages compliance without criminalizing poverty? Let me put it this way.
Well, first, I think if government will focus on high net worth individuals and large corporations, pursue them vigorously in order to get more tax from them as against the low and middle income earners. That would help a lot. Two, there's a need to simplify taxes for small businesses and the informal sector. Because if small businesses are paying, if the process of collecting taxes from small businesses and the informal sector are actually made very simple, then people will not think of evading tax. They would also not want to even not to talk of evading taxes. Another point, in my own opinion, is when government uses digital systems to reduce evasion and not raise rate. It's not about raising rate. Even as it is now, the small or the low rate we are paying, if they are to be collected efficiently and also administered or used judiciously, I believe the country will be better. But because there are a lot of leakages and many people are evading tax, especially high net worth individuals are not paying tax as they should, so as they are supposed to pay, and that companies are also avoiding, because they have a way of avoiding tax. They even employ or engage tax consultants to help them with methods and ways or strategies to avoid tax. Interestingly or incidentally, in law, tax evasion is a crime, but tax avoidance is not a crime. It is only unethical. By avoiding tax, we mean you are paying, but you're not paying the appropriate rate. One is supposed to pay 10,000 naira, he's paying 1,000 naira, or 500 naira, or 100 naira, or 1 kobo or 10 kobo. The remaining 9,000 plus, you are avoiding it. It is not criminal. It is unethical. But evading tax, not to pay it at all, refusal to pay it, or to take strategies or to follow strategies that will make you not to pay it at all, either by delisting yourself or by hiding yourself from tax authorities, is criminal. And that can actually lead to legal action against the payer. So if government will use digital systems that are transparent with full accountability in order to reduce tax evasion, not to raise rates, that will encourage people to pay, and people will definitely, many people will not be thinking of evading tax or even avoiding tax, not to even talk of evading them. Again, if government should come up with a system that will protect low and middle income earners through threshold and exemptions. Yes, you have threshold, you have exemptions that can expand the tax base of Nigeria. However, what happens to accountability, what happens to responsiveness, and what happened to blockage of leakages, what also happened to dealing with people who are corrupt. So there has to be a system in place that will help check corruption and would also block leakages that are very, very common in the case of Nigeria. So transparent use of tax revenue with public, reporting, and also visible linkage between taxes and services like roads, health, education, and so on. Strong anti-corruption enforcement and accountability would all help in supporting or enabling Nigeria to have a robust tax system that people will be willing to comply with without thinking of avoiding tax, not to even talk of evading it.
Now, let us look forward. What will a just and Islamic inclined ethical tax system in Nigeria look like in practice over the next decade? And finally, what message would you like to offer Nigerians who increasingly perceive taxation and extraction as an extraction rather than a contribution to collective welfare?
In my opinion, a just Islamic ethical tax system, necessitates, putting in place a fair, progressive tax with clear public benefits. It should be fair, as we explained earlier. It should be progressive, as the higher you earn, the more tax you pay. The lower you earn, the low tax you pay. And there should be clear public benefits, well-spelled public benefits. Take, for example, the issue of sukuk in Nigeria. Sukuk is making the impact expected of it because nobody would approve for government to, come up with sukuk or offer for subscription any sukuk in the name of federal government without clear public benefits. There has to be precise and very clearly stated, justification and purpose for the sukuk subscription. Again, even how the proceeds will be used must be clearly spelled out. So this kind of information is required even with regards to taxes. So if the tax is fair and is progressive and there is clear public benefit associated with the tax, I believe that would align to a just Islamic ethical tax system. Again, transparent governance, and zero tolerance for corruption. There should be no opportunity for people to perpetrate or to be corrupt when it comes to the collection or assessment, collection, and distribution of tax revenue. Integration of Zakat and Wakaf is also important. Governments of Nigeria should consider integrating Zakat and Wakaf into its social policy. This conditional transfer of a thing that government is doing, I believe if Zakat and Wakaf should be integrated into this social protection system of government, it would go a long way in supporting, consolidating, as well as complementing what government is doing. Lastly, the issue of strong protection for the poor and vulnerable. It is important for the poor and vulnerable to be protected by any tax system. If this is missing, then that tax system is certainly not going to be a just system, is not going to be a tax system that aligns with Islamic ethical principles. So once you have this fairness, progressiveness, transparency, zero tolerance for corruption, integration of Islamic social finance mechanisms or instruments, as well as strong protection for the poor and vulnerable, I think the tax system will be just and will be ethical in the way it is operated. Now, on a final note, I think what is important is for government to make more efforts in educating the taxpayers, that there should be deliberate taxpayer education policy, where people will be well informed, will be educated, will be enlightened on these tax issues, what is there for them, the issues that are at stake, how to calculate them, so that people will know, or people need to know, that the system is fair and is progressive, and government means serious, or government means business, and this time around, not business as usual, but business with all seriousness, with zero tolerance for corruption, and with all the elements of transparency and good governance put in place. I think if this is done, inshallah, we will be able to harness more than the government probably would ordinarily want to or think of harnessing, and will be, inshallah, better placed as a country to boast of the quantum it collects from taxes and other revenues, as well as in the area of developmental projects or programs courtesy of tax and other revenues. Wallahu alam.
Jazakumullah khairan. Thank you very much indeed, Professor, and it is our pleasure having you on our platform this morning. And we look forward to more of your coming. And we thank you very much indeed on behalf of the Africa. We extend our regards to you and best wishes. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum.